Welcome, everybody, to a fourth episode or fourth part of Questioning the State, briefings on Palestine, on ceasefires, with an S, I guess, and the ICJ decision. I am joined by the two people who have been loyal to this series and who have been the most capable of speaking on this topic, Saeed Arikat and Sam Husseini. I'll introduce them in just a moment. Suffice it to say that the collapse of Israel's narrative regarding its war or genocide campaign in Gaza is now recognized as reality, but not so in the US halls of power. In foreign policy briefings at the US State Department, we continue to witness obfuscation, duplicity, and at times brazen abrogation of several fundamental values professed by the United States, specifically when it comes to Israel and Palestine. Our guests include one of the most recurring critical fixtures of these briefings, and as well a longtime participant and critic, both of them. They share their recent experiences and commentary, as well as exchanges which the world watches in now customary disbelief. Once we get a video of an exchange at the State Department with one of the spokespeople, we know what's coming. It's like watching Saturday Night Live had it not been so tragic and brutal, the reality that is. We will also talk about the ceasefire deal that is being derailed, and we will talk about why. We will talk about some of the massacres that have been taking place nonstop, and importantly, the ICJ decision. Before I introduce folks, let me just say marhaba, Saeed and Sam, and thank you for
Yeah.
joining us.
Salam.
Ahlan.
Hello. Hello.
Saeed Arikat has been the Washington bureau chief of the prominent Al Quds daily newspaper and an adjunct professor at American University. Currently, his reporting centers around the United States Department of State. He is a frequent guest on Arab Satellite TV as commentator on US politics and its foreign and security policies. Sam Hosseini is an independent journalist and excellent, and writer who has been piercing through the establishment's falsification for 25 years. And I know because I've been reading him for actually more than 25 years, Sam, you're being modest. Starting October 2023, he wrote a series of pieces about the possibility of a country invoking the Genocide Convention against Israel at the International Court of Justice. In the 1990s, he scrutinized the U.S. sanctions policy against Iraq. He similarly exposed false pretexts for the bombing of Iraq and Sudan by the Clinton administration. You can find more on husseini.substack.com. Again, ahlan wa sahlan, Saeed and Sam, and I would love us to. There's a lot to talk about. I know we want to get to the ICJ decision in relation to what we're talking about regarding ceasefires and the other with the main topic of State Department discourse or the discourse of the Halls of Power in the United States. And we will also talk about the horrific massacres that continue, the starvation policies, all in relation to how the US is responding to these, given that this is the focus. Let me start with Saeed. Before we get to the specifics, and I know a lot of people want to hear or get to the specifics, but I'd like to hear from you, and then Sam, if you would share with us what has been the basically the development of State Department or U.S. government discourse in the past couple of months to 3 months. Have you seen any shifts at all, and in what regard have you seen that? And if not, what do you think is happening?
Sure. Greetings, Bassam and Sam. Of course, it's always great to be with you both on this program. You know, the more things change, to use the common adage, the more they stay the same. The State Department has basically been really consistent in defending Israel all throughout. I've been going there for the better part of 25 years, and it has always been the same. It has always defended Israel endlessly. It has always spoken of the sacred as Ned Price once told me, and told the briefing, and I asked him, and he said that Israel's security is sacred. So it is really that is it's amazingly consistent. Whether it was, the late Bill Clinton administration, the George W. Bush administration, others, and so on, all throughout the Obama, Trump, it's the same. There is consistency with different words, but pretty much it is the same. It is always out there to defend the Israeli position. Sometimes, I mean, the comments I get, Bassam, from those who watch the briefing, they make two comments. They say, "Is this guy representing Israel?" And the other comment is, "How do you take it?" I mean, this is, and the truth is, sometimes I can feel, my stomach turning when I ask these questions and to listen to them. I am there honestly to ask my questions because Bassam and I write about the briefing. It used to be that I would completely write about the briefings. In the old days, when Palestine and Gaza were not in the news, it was basically what I can generate myself. In terms of discussion that would allow me to write because I have to write to my newspaper every day, sometimes 2, 3 times a day, as you probably see. So it is a vital stop for me. I mean, there were some painful times during the Pompeo tenure, or before him, Tillerson's tenure, and so on, where basically, I mean, these guys were outwardly hostile to the anything Palestinian, and total advocation, especially total advocacy of Israel and Israeli occupation and Israeli apartheid as under Pompeo. To their credit, they did both Heather Nauert and Morgan Ortegas, who were the spokespeople under Pompeo, would always give me a question to ask him. I would ask him every time. And not these guys, by the way. Not that I have not been able to ask uh, Blinken a question. I think once probably in all the 4 years that he's been coming to the State Department. So to say, I not to take too long, but what we have seen in the last few weeks, we have seen them say we are hopeful. I mean, this is the only development when it comes to the ceasefire talks. We are hopeful. They're not saying that the onus on Hamas, at least in the last 3 weeks. They're saying we want to wait. I mean, I raised the issue that it's actually Netanyahu thwarting or scuttling the talks, and they say we are hopeful. We're not there yet. You tell them that the Israeli government took this measure or that measure, and this is totally intended to scuttle the talks, as in the bombing of Nusayrat, the massacres that are ongoing every day. I think the purpose is really to basically put an end to the talk. Sometimes what you hear from the Israelis, whether it's the prime minister or the other cabinet minister, and things that appear on face value to be, different positions, I don't know. Then you see the action, and the action is always very consistent. So we have not seen, any departure from the basic position that is in total support of what Israel is doing and the Israeli massacres. We have seen a little bit of maybe utilizing some words like hopeful, that the talks are ongoing. They're not blaming Hamas completely. They're saying that, of course, they blame Hamas in terms of saying, well, I mean, this war could end tomorrow if Hamas were to surrender. That is their position. So there's been consistency. We'll see how they react next week when Netanyahu is in town. But in one word, they are very consistent.
I I generally agree with everything Saeed said, but I would, you know, add a couple of, I think, and I haven't sufficiently documented this. I've documented some of the things I'll talk about, but I sense that sometimes they change their tenor on Israel to for ulterior motives. For example, when the UN is considering action regarding Israel, they'll hint that maybe they recognize that Israel has committed war crimes, in order to pretend as if they're being reasonable at a strategic time and place. Um, I think I think they've conducted a very sophisticated operation in terms of the whole discourse around the ceasefire, because On May 24th, you had the ICJ issue orders from the South Africa genocide case demanding that Israel stop its offensive in Rafah, which the Biden administration never recognized actually started, right? They kept saying, we oppose this. That was their line for weeks and weeks. We oppose an invasion of Rafah, but it hasn't started yet. Well, the ICJ on May 24th said the Rafah invasion started on May 7th, and it needs to, and we order that it stop. And then you had the Algerians apparently draft a resolution at the UN Security Council, and the US delayed that for a while. And then on the
Yeah.
31st, you had Biden proclaim that he was putting forward a ceasefire proposal that he claimed was Israeli. And, but Israel never really backed it. And even in his more recent remarks, Biden has said that, called it that it was his ceasefire proposal and that it still needs time to work. So I think that they've been stalling for time in order to facilitate Israel continuing its daily, virtually slaughters of the Palestinian people, especially in Gaza, while using the discourse of ceasefire to pretend that that's actually what they're after. But what they're actually after is undermining international law, and they actually got a UN Security Council resolution, um, uh, sort of sanctifying their so-called ceasefire process. And the UN Security Council resolution, made no reference to the International Court of Justice's orders, and it claimed in the resolution that Israel had accepted the ceasefire terms, all false, so that Biden could pretend for weeks and weeks that Hamas is the sole holdup. That's what he claimed during the so-called debate with Trump. They've somewhat backed away from that now because it's so untenable, because it's so transparent to everybody that Israel is in fact the holdup to even this proposal. And you know, so I think that they've done a lot of damage in the way that they've modified the whole discourse. And the discourse has now shifted also from genocide Joe to geriatric Joe. I think that this is a substantial win for the establishment. Everybody's gotten sucked into the whole those whole dynamics of questions around the election and so on as to Biden's mental capacities rather than his culpability for genocide. So I don't look at that and see bungling. I look at that and I see a very sophisticated operation to mold the public mind, especially in the United States.
Thank you, both. Let me ask you about this regarding one issue before we go on. I know, again, we want to go to the other material. How is this messaging that you're talking about, whether it is changing in terms of the emballage or the sort of tone, while keeping the actual reality of support intact, or whether it actually is a bit more than that, or perhaps there is a desire to do more? Whatever it is, how is the question of elections affecting this change in quotation marks, and how did the recent assassination attempt um, affect Biden's position on the genocide in Gaza? So, if we can just address that, please.
You want me to do
Yes,
that?
please start.
Okay. All right. Well, that's a very important question for sure. First of all, Sam's last point. I mean, changing the tempo of what they're saying from genocide Joe to geriatric Joe is so it is so true, But the genocide goes on. I mean, unabatedly and ferociously. And I think unfortunately, it will continue to go on. I don't see a ceasefire on the horizon. Although they keep saying, they keep hinting, we're close. That's what Blinken said at the Aspen Institute a couple of days ago, that we're that close. I could see it. I could almost taste it and feel it. But they say whatever they say, Bassam, with the focused on the fact that they are more than likely are not coming back. I mean, this team at the State Department, whether it's Miller or his deputies or indeed Blinken, are not coming back for the very simple reason. And you could see their attitude is a bit subdued on Thursday, the last time we had a briefing. I mean, they continued saying the same thing, but there's almost like you can feel in the air some sort of a resignation that basically Trump is going to win. And that has changed dramatically, man, since before the debate, let's say, when there were an element of cockiness about the State Department that's always there. And I agree with Sam. I mean, nothing is haphazard in America. Everything is planned, gone through scenarios, carefully picked out, every word, every syllable, everything, so it doesn't go to chance. They have a steady policy of supporting Israel because it is part of the colonial project. I mean, we're not talking about this right now, but that's what it is. That will not change. But to them, they are fully aware of the point that you uh, probed or approached with Sam, and that is, the bad performance of Biden in the debate is going to be. By the way, if you recall, Biden was coherent all throughout the debate, but when it came to the issue of Palestine, he was able to be very clear that it is Hamas's fault, and also Trump, who lied all throughout the debate on everything, but he was very truthful on the Palestinian issue. So, and he said no. Israel wants this war to continue because they want to finish the job. And then he went on to call Biden a bad Palestinian, so he turned it into a slur. So they're very clear on the issue of the Palestinian thing. So I think that moving forward, we will see probably a bit of a change in the attitude. We will see the State Department, as we have seen them in the last few days, focus on the settlements, imposing sanctions on certain settlers, on certain groups, and saying these are the bad guys. Now they are floating that, we're considering maybe sanctions on Smotrich and Ben Gvir and all these things. I've been asking about Smotrich ever since this government was formed back in January 2022, and I told them the other day. I raised this with Miller the other day because I mean, even then there was talk of the declaring Smotrich and Ben Gvir as persona non grata. So even then, we talked about this. So we will see, and that always, almost always, will give them some sort of a cover. They can talk about the settlement. They can talk about the settler violence without defining it. I mean, this is. I asked the question that many of these violent settlers are U.S. citizens, actually born and raised in America. I know most of the settler attacks on Kiryat Arba is really done by Americans. On my village, for instance, done by American settlers from nearby settlements and so on. And these do not fall. These guys do not fall under the sanctions because the sanction is completely focused on denying visas and maybe some bank accounts. And they say it without, of course, defining what they are going to do. So yes, I mean they are definitely shaken. They were shaken. Their confidence was shaken by the debate for sure because they of course steered away from discussing it and so on. The assassination attempt. There was a discussion on Monday. I think Matthew Lee raised it on. Do you have any comment and so on? So it's the State Department always goes under the sort of the pretext or whatever the cover that we don't discuss domestic issues. We're here to discuss foreign policy. The foreign policy remains the same. It stays the same. I asked the question: does the assassination attempt in any way impact U.S. Foreign policy or things that are in the pipeline. But I think that they are not going to be able to avoid, let's say, on Monday, responding to the conversation between Trump and Zelensky, for instance, because there was a conversation between them. Is that basically Zelensky's almost resigning totally to that Trump is going to be the president? These issues that are related, whether to the convention, the assassination attempt, or the bad performance, or what happened indeed to to Biden, whether he stays or not. And I think Netanyahu arrives tomorrow or the day after, because he's meeting with Biden in the White House on Monday, the 22nd. So we'll see how they do handle all these issues.
I mean, my last two exchanges, such as they were with Miller, was
Yeah,
uh, when he was talking about, I think after Said raised it, the Lancet
yeah,
issue,
right, right.
the Lancet number of possibly
Yeah,
180,000,
186,000.
186,000 deaths,
Yeah,
um, and I he had a persistent smirk on his face, and I called it out.
yeah,
And and then right after the assassination, he start opened with a condemnation of political violence, and then at some point he seemed to justify political violence when it's done by Israel, saying that that Hamas should be more conciliatory to the Israelis, given that all of these massacres are going on, which seemed to me to be a justification of political violence. And I called that out, and he wouldn't come back to me. And I regularly, say follow up. I have my hand up, during virtually every opening, and so on. And he's refused to call on me. I think that me calling out his smirk sort of added to that, but that's my critique of it. In terms of their claims about opposing political violence while doing everything to facilitate political violence on a mass scale. Um, I mean, in terms of the election, I think that they are attempting to construct a narrative where Trump is worse, and to secure the support of people who, 3 months ago were swearing that they would never vote for Biden. And I think that they, may actually make inroads on that if people aren't careful. Um, that they're a they have a point. Trump could be worse, in my view. That is, Trump could an ethnic cleansing campaign, for example, or they could conceivably attempt to drive out the Palestinians from Gaza during the transition period. People might recall that it was during the transition period in 2009 that you had the first, I think, really huge assault of a series of them against Gaza in 2008, 2009, as Obama was coming into office. So they could use that as something of a model in terms of if the election. Um, but I mean, my view in terms of the election, for what it's worth, is I have a project called Vote Pact that advocates people pairing up, disenchanted, a would-be Biden voter and a would-be Trump voter, instead of self-loathingly voting for one genocider or another, pairing up and both together voting a third party. So they're not helping their least worst candidate. So you instead get two votes for the Green libertarians or whoever, so that the voting is more reflective of people's actual beliefs. Because the main draw for people voting for Biden is that he's not Trump, and vice versa. So people can break out of that by finding their political mirror image. And I think that doing that, and it requires hard work, but doing that, especially in the Arab American community, could be instrumental towards really changing U.S. policy, because just not voting is just like saying, okay, I'm committing political, I'm irrelevant to the electoral process. It's good to do other activism, protests, writing, and so on. I'm not minimizing those activities, but I think that doing something like that uses the electoral process, as flawed as it is, to a very strategic purpose. And it also helps build unity among people across the political spectrum on this and other issues.
Thank you both. I'd like to run a clip from one of the conversations between, well, I don't know if it's a conversation between Miller and Saeed. So let's go to it. One second. This was, let me see. I'm having trouble getting it. 1 second. This was the conversation or the back and forth, Saeed, on the ceasefire deal and Netanyahu thwarting. If you can set it up for us while I set it up here, that would be great.
I don't have it. I don't think I have it. You're talking to me to set it up?
Yeah, but your exchange a little while ago with Miller, but
right.
Hang on, let me see if I can.
Okay,
there we go. Here we go. 1 second. So we'll just watch it.
The attack on Mawasi that killed close to 100 Palestinians, injured about 300 others, and so on, under the pretext of targeting Hamas leaders, which is really a very.
Pretext is a big word, Saeed. I just want to make sure that's the word you mean.
Okay, I mean, under the claim that they were targeting Hamas leaders, which they never have to prove anyway. They can say, we know that this X person was there and Y person was there, so we target them, we kill all these people. Then nobody's going to ask us, and the most they can do is just, we will launch an investigation, which we never hear the results of. So you don't feel that such a crime, really, using F-35 to bomb two places, one of them against the respondents, the first responders and so on, while the other was going on. You don't think this is an attempt by the Israeli government to just basically say, you can go, fly a kite, so to speak.
So Saeed, if you were the representative of the Palestinian people charged with negotiations for this ceasefire, is the idea that the loss of civilian life would make you less committed to reaching a ceasefire? I guess I don't understand the logic of the question.
I'm not talking about the Palestinians.
No. I'm just saying that if the idea is somehow that this strike and the loss of civilian life would somehow jeopardize negotiations for a ceasefire because the other side wouldn't want to reach a ceasefire, I don't think I understand the claim.
No, I think what we have seen in statements and indeed in the negotiations that Hamas is really, at least it appears to be committed to the negotiations and so on. But what we have seen is a pattern by the Israeli government that every time we get close to the results, we get something like this, we get a bombardment that, in the hope that it will scuttle, and leave it, to keep the onus on Hamas, so to speak. So we're not concerned about the Palestinians are committed to this ceasefire, but are you certain that Israel is committed to the points that were, stated by the president on May 31?
They are committed to the proposal that they put forward, that the president publicly described on May 31st. They have said that publicly. They have affirmed that to us privately. And they have committed to trying to work to reach a ceasefire and bridge the remaining differences. And that work is ongoing. It was ongoing here inside our building today.
If I might follow up on that.
Go ahead.
Didn't you just justify political violence?
Go ahead.
You just justified. You said Hamas should negotiate. Hamas should negotiate.
There are people in this room.
You just justified.
There are people in this room who come and raise their hand and ask questions, and I'm going to call on them. Go ahead, please.
So a lot of people are commenting on various platforms about your patience and how you could keep asking the same kind of questions, getting the same kind of answers, and how patient and graceful you are, Saeed. So can you tell
Yeah.
us about this exchange and kind of, the back and forth in general recently with Miller and others, which I'll actually have one more clip. But please go ahead first.
Yeah. Okay.
Uh, he may be frozen. Saeed, I think
Well,
I think he will end up having to call back. But from the look on his face, frozen, it says everything.
well,
Sam, you
I
want to
mean,
comment until we hear from Saeed?
sure. I mean, Saeed's been doing it for a long time, and he has been very patient. And I've been somewhat patient, but as you saw in the clip there, I wasn't so patient because I chimed in. That was what I was referring to. This was the day after, or this was the first briefing after the shooting in Pennsylvania at the Trump rally, and they opened with a condemnation of political violence, a very sweeping one. And what I heard Miller responding to Saeed, basically saying Hamas should be more conciliatory because of these massacres. And that to me is a justification for political violence. It's in effect instrumentalizing Israeli violence against Palestinian civilians to prod Hamas into more and more concessions in their negotiations. And I called it out. And I said, in the way that other reporters do, I say, follow up. The audio you had there was good, but not great. I record my own things so that I can produce things that capture my voice in the exchanges better. And I say, follow up. And didn't you just, justify political violence there by saying that Hamas needs to negotiate in order to prevent Palestinians from being slaughtered? And he didn't want to entertain that, and he typically doesn't want to entertain that. Other reporters say follow up, and they get called on. I say follow up, I don't get called on. I get skipped over, literally. He'll call to people in front of me, behind me, to the left of me, to the right of me, but he won't call on me because I think my questions are particularly aggressive. I think it's more than called for. Yeah, I mean, the whole, the whole tenor of Israeli violence has been one, as Saeed noted in his question, to undermine the possibility of negotiated settlement. And they similarly respond with increased violence after the ICJ orders. And other things. Is Saeed back here?
Yeah. Thank you, Sam. But please finish your thought, unless you did finish, and we'll go back to Saeed, and then we'll come back to you.
Yeah, I basically finished my thought.
Saeed, sorry, you froze right after the video. No
sorry
worries.
about the disconnection. Let me just
Sure.
answer your question that you posed to me before.
Yeah, I talked a little bit about my chiming in after your question,
Right.
but
Right. Yeah. Look, the point that I was trying to make, that they continuously, almost every time, they put the blame on Hamas. And on May 6th, actually, Hamas agreed to the American proposal. It was an American proposal. I know this. I know this from the people that were, some of the people that were involved. The Americans had submitted a proposal. They went and they said, we are hopeful this time around because it does respond to Hamas's needs and so on. That was on Thursday, I believe it was the 2nd of May. And then we know that on the 6th of May, Hamas agreed to it. They told them, okay, we agree to this deal. Let's go ahead and do it. And then what we also saw is that on that very day, Netanyahu launched his attack on Rafah. That's exactly the sequence of events. So I was asking in this context. I mean, I don't need to keep saying everything all over again, although sometimes I do, because have discussed it with these people over and over again. And now that Hamas has agreed to the 31st of May proposal that, Biden said that was an Israeli proposal, then they said it's an American proposal, Israeli, back and forth and so on. Then we saw Netanyahu actually reject his own proposal, which they have done all throughout. I mean, that if that proves anything, it proves that the United States, at least, is not backing its own position. They state a position. They send Burns. They send Burns and they send McGurk and so on. And both Kirby and Miller said repeated the same thing. If we were not so serious, we will not be sending top American officials there. Which is true. I mean, you can't get any higher than the CIA guy, and it's the CIA guy actually oversaw these details of the proposals. They came around, they came back. Bassam, the State Department came back and said Israel, Hamas has changed some of the details. Well, in fact, it was the CIA guy, Burns, the top guy, who said, "Okay, this is fine with us. They have agreed to what we want." But then it didn't happen, and I don't think it will happen. I think that Netanyahu is going to kick the can down the road because he knows, that there are 4 more months for the elections, or less, 3.5 months, and we already have like a lame duck presidency with Biden. Biden's not going to be able to do anything. He's so weakened and so injured, and it's there's such a hawkishness in the Congress. I mean, you will see this on full display next Wednesday when they will give Netanyahu every 10 seconds they give him a standing ovation and so on. We know that it's done for domestic reason, and Netanyahu knows that. He knows that he plays a big role in the domestic on the domestic political scene and so on. He has a lot of influence, and he doesn't feel that he should be he should hurry reaching an agreement. I hope I am wrong, but I don't think they will. I think Netanyahu wants to push this all the way to next January. We remember what Hanigbi said. Hanigbi, the national security advisor in Israel, he said that the war will last for another 8 months. That was some months back, and it falls directly with January inauguration and so on, the new presidency. So the Israelis know what they're doing. They're going to continue to do that with different levels. I mean, they will respond. I don't think there's going to be a total war with Hezbollah al Sabil Mithal. So it'll be just a low grade or this kind of level of attacks and so on. So they keep it going. And I mean, I don't want to talk too long about this, but Netanyahu knows that a ceasefire would be interpreted by Palestinians and by Arabs in general as a defeat for Israel, and he doesn't want to be the guy who sat or oversaw under his tenure the defeat of Israel. So that is the motivation. Some people say he doesn't want to go to prison. I don't think he's afraid of going to prison. I don't think he knows that his government is going to fall anyway. But he finds a great deal of irony that the guy Chuck Schumer, who told him on March 28th, went out and said, you are not helpful. You are an obstacle to peace in Israel. You should resign. You should have a new election. Basically saying what Biden wanted him to say. And now Chuck Schumer himself will be greeting him, giving him standing ovation and so on. And Chuck Schumer at the same time is asking Biden to resign or leave the thing. So there is an element of irony there. So that's where we are. I don't think we are, in terms of the ceasefire, Bassam, I don't think we are closer today than we were a few weeks or a few months back. Now, the only difference is to their chagrin, to every American chagrin, or probably to their utter surprise for sure, that the Palestinian resistance is able to go on and actually, levy some very strong blows on the Israelis after 9 months. That is really the factor that, in the end, will make them probably acquiesce to the same kind of dynamics that were agreed upon, but they are going to wait it out to give the the credit to Trump. When he if he when he comes back in January.
Before we lose you again, I don't want to lose you again. I'm going to play one more clip, Saeed, and then we're
Okay.
going to talk a little bit about some of the commentary and articles of Sam on
Yeah.
a few topics, including, of course, the elections, but also both of your commentaries on the ICJ. So let me play the clip first.
Right.
The Mossad leader, the Israeli intelligence leader, said that Netanyahu is really intent on thwarting any deal. Do you have any comment on that? Did you hear the Mossad chief, what he said, and so on?
So
again?
for obvious reasons, Saeed, I'm not
Right.
going to negotiate or speak about the deliberative process from up here. What I can say is that we're working to get a deal. We're working to get a ceasefire and bring the hostages home, and we continue to believe a diplomatic resolution is achievable and urgent. We're hopeful about the direction that things are progressing in, and we believe, as I said, something is achievable. But I'm not going to get more specific or offer commentary beyond that.
But Mr. Bernier, the head of the Mossad, is the guy who is really heading the negotiations. So he knows. He knows exactly what's going on. He knows that his prime minister is not allowing him to go forward with the deal. You don't have a comment on that?
I'm just not going to negotiate on this process in public, saying that would be unhelpful to the process. What I can say is that we are hopeful about the direction that things are progressing in. We believe a deal is both achievable. It's something that we have been working around the clock. It's an urgent priority for Secretary Blinken, and this is something that we're working to get across the finish line. But I don't have more for you.
Yeah. So this was interesting. Any comments also from both? You can start, Saeed.
Yes, of course. I mean, when he said that the Mossad guy, which is the head of intelligence and so on, goes on supposedly authorized to do whatever and arrive at a deal, and he knows all the details and so on, and then you say, well, no, I did not agree to this and so on. So the Americans know that the Israelis are not serious about a ceasefire. They are still convinced that Hamas can be defeated, despite one report after the other by U.S. intelligence, by British intelligence, by the French, by the Mossad itself, indeed, that Hamas cannot be defeated. You cannot defeat, a national liberation movement. I mean, it could be reduced, it could be diminished, it could be some, but it will always be there because as long as the occupation is there, there's going to be resistance. So their hope is by killing all Palestinians. And I think that's what's going on. It's what we have is not a war. What we have, Bassam, بالعربي, مقتلة, مقتلة. It's a slaughter of Palestinians. Nothing else. I mean, they know Israel has had its crisis emanates from the fact that one, they are unable to defeat the Palestinians, and second, they are unwilling to absorb the Palestinians, and third, they are unable to basically ethnically cleanse Palestine to drive all the Palestinians out. Those are the things that they are doing. They will never accept otherwise. So they go on to slaughtering them. That's what the Americans did with Native Americans here. That's what they did with the Aborigines and so on. So slaughter them if you cannot, sort of uh, basically break them down, break them, as you would break a wild horse. Then you go on slaughtering them. Israel will never agree to a Palestinian state of any kind. None. It will not agree to a Palestinian state in my village, Wabadis, or Jericho, and so on. I mean, their claim to the land. What did Netanyahu say in response to the ICJ yesterday? He said that you are telling the Israelis to basically they cannot be in the land that was given to them by God. That's what he said. So they will never agree to a Palestinian state. I think it's just, anyone that it's okay to say it as maybe a slogan or as maybe a point for discussion and so on. But in reality, it'll never happen. It'll never happen. If the United States believes for a minute that a two-state solution is achievable, it can say, okay, this is what we want. This is what we recognize. We recognize the Palestinian state within these borders. It would have this, this, and this. I mean, you could have like a 10-point defining what that two-state, but they're not serious. When they say, I asked about the Knesset the other day. There was a vote in the Knesset, and it was overwhelming, 68 members, to against 9, that said no state ever. And you raise this issue, and you know that the United States has always adhered to that the two-state solution can only be arrived at through negotiation. And you have one part.
Uh-oh. See, that's where I wanted him to go first. تفضل Sam until Saeed returns, and then I'm going to ask you about the ICJ. 1 second. Hang on. You're muted. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, well, we should definitely talk about the latest ICJ moves. I mean, I concur, with the notion that destroying Hamas is the pretext. It's not the goal. The goal is to inflict as much damage as possible on the Palestinian population. And Israel is fulfilling that goal. I disagree with some of my friends who say that Israel is being defeated. Israel is succeeding in its actual goals. It's just that, I mean, sometimes it does say that that's its actual goal in their more honest moments. But that is their actual goal. So I think that needs to be highlighted, and I think that there are a number of ways of exposing that. I do media work. The activism that some people do, I think, has been co-opted by this talk of Biden wanting a ceasefire. I don't think they do want a ceasefire. I think they just don't want it to be so transparent that they are facilitating Netanyahu's continued slaughter, so that it buys them some political space, that can't be allowed to happen. They need to be exposed thoroughly for their massive support of Netanyahu in all of this. So I think that those are the two main things. I'm not sure if Saeed had additional comments or if we should move on to the ICJ or.
We probably should move on to the ICJ in the last 10 minutes unless Saeed has something pressing to finish because you were cut off. 1 second.
I don't know, something's wrong with my connection here. But as I was saying, when they continue to insist that this two-state solution must be predicated on negotiations, not through an international conference, that's why they oppose having a two-state solution or international conference and so on. But adopted by an. But you have here, the Israelis will never, ever negotiate this. I mean, they made that very plain and clear. And he's going to come, Netanyahu will come and, be on his high horse. And he knows very well, he's a fox. He knows how to manipulate American politicians. He knows them very well. He knows each and every one of them. He's been around for a very, very long time. So he's going to talk about, that it's their God-given right. I mean, Judea and Samaria, as they call the West Bank, is basically, the Bible is all about that. They don't have any more legitimacy in Jaffa and Haifa and in the Galilee more than, let's say, the West Bank. So that is the point that's going to be made. I think that it's high time that no one really talks about this issue anymore, the two-state solution, because it is a waste of time, and it has given cover to the Americans and to the Europeans and really to the Arab countries for a very long time. And it's time for it to end.
Thanks, Saeed. In the last few minutes, if you don't mind, both, if we can talk a little bit about the ICJ decision on the unlawfulness and illegality of Israel's continuing occupation, which is news to me. I'm joking. However, this is the ICJ, and it's a
Yeah.
really, really important development. So, if you can start, Sam, with any comments you might have, which also can mirror some of your writings that I have seen recently,
Yeah.
or commentary. Yeah.
I should say, and I have a bit of mixed feelings about the decision. It was a very strong decision in many respects, but just pertaining to what Saeed just said, it is in a way trying to breathe new life into the two-state solution, right? Because it is in that rubric. It's not talking about Israel's guilt of genocide or general legitimacy. It's simply talking about the occupation. Um, but it was still a very important decision, I think. It showed that the Geneva Conventions apply. And I've asked several questions about this. The U.S. position is clearly they won't say it because they're too embarrassed to say it, that they will not recognize the applicability of the Geneva Conventions to the Palestinian people. Every people all around the world have protections under the Geneva Conventions, but not the Palestinian people. That's fundamentally the State Department position, and I've attempted to call that out in my questioning there. Um, but I think that the end of the ICJ decision is really a challenge to everyone because it basically says we're declaring so much of what Israel has been doing, the settlements and so on, illegal. And now it's up to the General Assembly and the Security Council to do their work to implement that. And this is sort of where we were with the genocide decision, right? The ICJ gave orders and they were never implemented by the Security Council. They were never implemented by the General Assembly. The General Assembly, I've written extensively about the uniting for peace process, whereby 2/3 of the General Assembly can basically take hold of a matter when the Security Council has failed because of a veto of any members to fulfill the Security Council's proper job. This is actually what happened in 1956. In 1956, when France and Britain with Israel invaded Egypt as well as Gaza, um, the U.S. and the Soviet Union used Uniting for Peace to put in a military force. This was the first UN peacekeeping force to ensure the withdrawal of the Israeli, British, and French forces. So it is way past time that the General Assembly, that the UN in whole, isolate and expose the U.S. misuse of its veto. And that means not going along with resolutions like the one we just saw, which sanctified the U.S. baloney ceasefire process, and implement things. It can suspend Israel from participation in the General Assembly, as it did with apartheid South Africa. It can call on member states to impose military and economic sanctions on Israel. It can call out other member states. It could set up a tribunal if the ICC fails to do its job in prosecuting individual Israelis, as it did in the case of Rwanda. There are a whole series of things that the General Assembly does. So, I mean, my frustration has now gone beyond Netanyahu and the Biden administration. My frustration is with the U.S. voters that won't organize themselves in a way that challenges both Biden and Trump with my Vote Pact project. And my frustration is also with the international community, including countries that say that Israel is committing genocide, but won't put forward strong resolutions commensurate to that challenge. And so I think that there needs to be a massive lobbying effort by people, not just simply to protest Israel in the United States, but to compel their own governments, from Ireland to India to Malaysia to Brazil to all the Arab countries, to really put forward strong resolutions at the United Nations commensurate, uh, at least with what the ICJ just said.
If I may, just one comment, Sam, and I agree with everything that Sam said, and especially with the issue of uniting for peace. I think before June 10, when the Security Council adopted the Biden proposal, it was headed in that way. It was headed right in that direction because Algeria was trying to work out something that based on the uniting for peace and so on, do all the stuff that Sam talked about, things like preventing Israel from participating in meetings and so on of the General Assembly and all these things. So, yes, I just wanted to emphasize that this is a very good point that Sam raises, and it was, in fact, in mid-May, late May, even, and early, it was headed in that direction. The United States basically circumvented the issue by going to the Security Council and passing a resolution. The other thing, Bassam, is there is significance to the ICJ. It's very important because if they say this is occupied, then we know that in the annals of the United Nations and the Charter of the United Nations, people under occupation are allowed to resist by whatever means. So I find it significant in that particular uh, on that particular point.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the onus is really largely on a lot of Arab governments. I mean, Algeria withdrew its resolution, building on the ICJ orders from the South Africa's genocide case. They voted for the U.S. resolution that claimed that Israel accepted the ceasefire proposal. The Russians abstained, at least. I mean, it would have been something altogether if the Russians vetoed it. But the Algerians voted for it and put aside their own resolution. Where are all of the Arab governments? Where are all of the Muslim governments? Where's Turkey? There's so much complicity in people just giving lip service to things without putting their shoulder to the wheel. The only countries that have really visibly come close to putting their shoulders to the wheels are the South Africans, who put forward the genocide case against Israel, and the Nicaraguans, who put forward their own genocide case against the Germans. And other than that, I've been quite. I'm not impressed by virtually any other member state of the United Nations.
Thank you both. I have one
All
last
right.
question, very quick question, and if you need to go, I understand, but very quick question. And you're gonna yell at me because it's not easy. So Israel has failed politically miserably and militarily as well to achieve its objectives.
I
Do you?
disagree with that. I
Well,
disagree with that,
which
Bassam.
one?
I
Which
think
which part?
okay.
Which part?
I don't think Israel has failed.
Either politically or militarily?
No.
Okay, so
Netanyahu can take the heat. Netanyahu,
okay,
he's a big
let's
boy. He can
let's
take the heat. He wants to slaughter Palestine. He doesn't want to destroy Hamas.
no,
He
I'm
wants
referring
to.
I'm referring to the stated objectives.
Okay,
Militarily, they have not been
that's
able to
something else.
destroy Hamas, and politically, they have become more isolated than in the past 75 years. I'm not sure what
Right.
if those are the
That's
Right.
true.
things.
Yeah.
I'm not sure
No,
if those
I
are the things you're
look.
disagreeing with. But
Right.
let's agree to disagree if that's the case. That's fine.
Right.
Um, my question is, do you think this campaign, this genocidal campaign, will subside before the elections, or will subside before a Saudi-Israeli agreement is forged, and which one might come first, if at all?
First of all, let's deal with the Saudi American things. I believe that whatever normalization will take place, it will not be predicated on what they do towards the Palestinian issue or the war in Gaza. I asked this question to Miller last week, and he said no. We were talking because they uh, they spoke of the security aspect. The Saudis, that's what Kirby said, I think, and that's what Sullivan said. That what the Saudis want, they want a security arrangement, ironclad security arrangement with the United States, and they want a safe or a peaceful nuclear program, and they both agreed to both. So I don't think that the Palestinian issue, if normalization is going to happen. I don't believe that it will happen before the next administration, because bin Salman is very shrewd. He wants to wait and give this to Trump, in exchange for certain things and so on. But the slaughter will go on, not with the same intensity, not with the same intensity. What they will do, what we see, is evolving. That it's morphing into something like what goes on in the West Bank, except more intense. They will remain, and of course in Gaza and in the Gaza perimeter, they will continue to wage assaults. Israel has suffered a great deal in terms of armed vehicles and so on. It was astonishing figure cited by Yedaot Aharonot last week, that it's close to 2,400 mechanized vehicles were either completely destroyed or partially destroyed. So that's a big deal. So it will continue to rely on, let's say, helicopter sort of, this kind of war, a helicopter war, going into the refugee camp, doing what they did in Sirat on June 8th, or attack sporadically, or from time to time use fixed wing, as we've seen in Sirat 3 days ago, or indeed as we have seen in Jenin. They used the F-35 to hit their Jenin refugee camp. So that is where the war is going. It will be like this for a while, until such time when there is a resolution. But let me say this, it's by observing and by listening and by talking to all kinds of Palestinians from all political orientation, I don't believe that Hamas or Islamic Jihad or the other factions will agree to more concessions than we have seen so far. This is it. There is nothing else that they could agree to. So unless there is an agreement based on now, we're not going to see an agreement. The Israelis want the Palestinians to surrender. They think that the Palestinian issue will be totally liquidated if if Sinwar, let's say, surrenders and so on. But that is not going to be the case.
My concern as to how this plays out is that they will continue to stall for time. They'll continue to bomb Palestinians in Gaza, making them move up, down, left, and right. They'll continue to threaten and repress to a great extent the Palestinians in the West Bank. And then after the U.S. election happens, I think more and more of the establishment clearly wants Trump. And I think part of the reason for that is that they see Trump as doing what he says he's going to do, which is finishing the job. While Kushner is there saying that, wow, there's some lovely beachfront property in Gaza, and that Trump will pay off Sisi and attempt an actual ethnic cleansing to finish the job. And the Palestinians will be so punch drunk after being bombed left and right and going up and down Gaza for close to a year, that they think that they'll be able to pull that off, and that the international community will not be organized enough to confront that, and that the U.S. domestic population will be so sucked into the phoniness of the election that they will not be organized enough to confront that. So that's the threat that I see, particularly during the transition period, that they could attempt to do an actual ethnic cleansing campaign, which I think is Israel's actual goal. It might not be achievable, but I think that's their actual goal.
And this is part of your article, Sam, recently, that ethnic cleansing is the goal in the transition, right?
Yeah, that's my concern. That's my number one fear.
Where can people read that?
At my Husseini.substack.com. They can get that, and I put everything in front of the paywall, or 95% of my stuff. So
you're not a good capitalist.
I'm not.
So Husseini, just like the name is written, the last name on the screen, .substack.com. Okay. Saeed and Husseini, Saeed and Sam, before I let you go, I would like you to have the last word. I know we stayed a few minutes after the hour, but if you have any last words before you depart, I know, Saeed, you have something to attend to. But this floor is yours right now.
No, very, very, very quickly. I don't think we should hang a great deal of hopes on a ceasefire taking place anytime soon. Sadly, I don't think it will happen. The slaughter will go on. I don't believe that there's going to have a full scale war. Let's say with Lebanon, I think we'll continue to see sporadic attacks and counterattacks and so on, maybe more intense. We've seen a change in quality with this drone that struck Tel Aviv, and then the response of the Israelis. It's going to be like this, ebb and flow. But until then, I think that the people of Gaza, they will continue to suffer and fight alone.
Thank you.
Thank
Sam,
you.
any last words? Saeed, you have to hop off.
No, it's okay. I'll stay
Okay,
with
so we'll
Sam.
let Sam do the last words and then we'll close.
Sure. Yeah, I'd actually just reiterate my critique of both U.S. domestic dynamics, that people are getting sucked into the election rather than focusing on protests and finding creative ways, like my Vote Pact project, to effectively vote against Biden and Trump, and internationally to put pressure on governments to actually put their shoulder to the wheel. We've all done something to prevent this horror show, but I think we need to think more and more creatively about how to confront it, and not take anybody's word for anything. Don't accept it if whatever government says they're doing all that they can. No, they're probably not. They all need to be pushed massively to genuinely do all that they can, and not just simply to be gratified that some official is saying something bad about Netanyahu. No, not good enough. You actually have to do something to try to stop it. So that would be my main thought, frankly.
Thank you both very much, and we'll be on the lookout for the potential Netanyahu speech, and we'll also record whether the frequency of the collapse exceeds those in the Iraqi parliament under Saddam Hussein in the 80s. It's a toss up. Now we will. We'd like to have you again, hopefully under better circumstances. Thank you so much, both of you, Saeed and Sam, for joining us. Everyone here can watch the previous 3 iterations of Questioning the State, the last 2 of which were joined by both Saeed and Sam on palestineandcontext.org. You just have to go to under conversations and go to Questioning the State, and you can also find at this point, more than 80 teach-ins, podcasts, and these sorts of conversations and roundtables on the site. And you'll also be finding curated material on the site from all of these events, whereby we are cutting them up into smaller pieces from 2 hours or 1 hour to 5, 10, 15-minute segments, depending on the topic, where you can actually pick and choose what you like, especially for educators who would like to assign material and so on. Thank you all for joining. This is part of the Gaza and Context collaborative project, and we hope to see you all soon. Shukran.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Salam.